Our speaker tonight, whom you've seen sitting up here, is one of those rare men, in my opinion. The first 20 years of his life he spent in Indiana, a good Midwesterner, on a farm, through high school and so forth. He ended up getting into flight training and got his silver wings as an Air Force, Army Air Corps pilot in June of 1943 as a fighter pilot. And he was then assigned in a pool awaiting combat assignment overseas. About that time, there were so many losses of B-24 and B-17 pilots that he was asked to take a position as a co-pilot on a B-17 in North Africa. I believe it was North Africa. And he'll tell you more about that. It's a famous airplane. It's called the Mickey Finn. Good name, huh? Oh. And this was an artistic rendition of that aircraft as it was shot up. And he'll tell you a little bit more about the artist and the people and everything. I also want to thank Dave Regner, sitting out here, for putting me in touch with Joe Cotton. Thanks, Dave. We're here to listen to Joe, and I'd just like to give a couple highlights. He spent 40 years active flying, flew over 80 different types, including, of course, World War II aircraft, and that was not only the 4-engine type and multi-engine, but he flew all the fighters. He flew 51s, 47s. He flew the British Spitfire, the Hurricane, the Sea Fury, flew the Meteor. He flew all the jets, and then he'll tell you more, but he flew all of our high-performance advanced aircraft after the war. And I think that's where his recognition, although he wouldn't want to say that. I mean, I used to read about Joe, see pictures about him, along with his close fraternity of people that you also recognize. Guys like Scott Crossfield, Chuck Yeager, Pete Knight, Bud Anderson, and on and on. That's a small cadre of special experienced test pilots. He was the test pilot, the chief test pilot for the B-58 Hustler, as an example, our first supersonic bomber. He also was the chief test pilot, test director for the unbelievable B-70 Valkyrie. And there's some stories about that that he'll share with us, I believe. In summary, let me just say he logged over 16,000 hours, most of it in very high performance and dangerous test flying, and loved every minute of it, I can tell, because he shared some of that with me. He also, along the way, graduated from the Empire Flight Test School in Farnborough, England. Spent time in Wright-Patterson Field, Edwards Air Force Base. Without any more from me, help me welcome a very special man, Joe Cotton, Colonel Joe Cotton.
And then I'll join you down there.
You want to use this side?
At first, he wants to stay here.
How many of you saw Willie Mays when they unveiled his monument over at Pac Bell? Fantastic. Willie got up in front of a crowd just like this, and he said, "I just wondered what I could say last night." And he said, "For a while I thought I would cry." And I feel much like Willie, because really, I'm so full of things to say that it can't be done tonight. And the warmth of the crowd, and as Willie said, the setting and the people, I couldn't cry at all. But I'll tell you, it is a wonderful thing to be here, and I'm really proud that I was asked. But I've thought for a long time that public speaking is sort of a self-serving thing. You wrangle out an invitation, and then you get up, and you stand up, and you look down on people, and you tell them what you want to tell them for about 20 minutes, and about the time it comes for questions, they say we better adjourn. I think that's a dead loss. And so I've tried to figure a way to do it a little bit differently. And so after a while, you say, I know, it's your arthritis, isn't it? Yeah, a little bit. But I'd like to sit down and let's just talk people to people. We've all had flying experiences. Now, I'm not here to tell you big stories because the crew that I was with, when we had a reunion after we got out of Greece and we were together, and Captain Flournoy called back and talked to Iris, his wife, and she said, you know, what we've said here more than anything is, I don't remember that. And I think that's so. A lot of friends helped me to remember things, and I'm remembering more now than I used to. I think maybe I'm listening better. But I want to also say that it is hard for me to look down on anybody because I come from Indiana in the country, out Branson Woods way. In fact, we lived so far out in the country, had to go back towards town to go hunting. And that's one of the two things that I appreciate more than you can imagine. Those first 20 years on the farm and the 4 months down with the crew in Greece gave me a firm foundation to see me to almost 80. And I didn't know what was going on all through that, and it's just now starting to come through to me. I don't think I was a very good student. But I want to tell you about some regrets I have in life. I thought another different way to talk about it. I regret that I never went aboard a carrier with an airplane. I missed that. I missed the lightning. Wow. I was trying to get into the 14th fighter in North Africa, but you had to get 5 missions. I don't even have 1 full mission to my credit. I was with a crew that had 31, and I have a picture of their airplane with me if you'd like to see it. They went in the desert, full load of bombs and fuel, and then after that they came and they got a new co-pilot, and I went with them and we got shot down on the very next mission. I never flew the F-86. And I never flew the SR-71. I did fly the Tiger Moth and the DC-10. Did you know that the F-86 and the Tiger Moth and the DC-10 have one thing in common? Automatic slats. You'd never believe it, but what goes around comes around. I also was never a sailor, and I regret that in a way, because if I had been a sailor, I would probably have a tattoo. And every morning I look in the mirror. Every morning I look in the mirror, I think of that. The doctor said, "What's wrong, Joe?" And I said, "Well, I look in the mirror the other day and I cried." And he said, "Well, your eyes are okay." And I said, "But I think of Douglas MacArthur and what he said. Old soldiers never die, they just fade away. And if I had a tattoo, that'd be the only thing about me that's not fading away." So I regret that. Lots of other things I regret. I don't have time to share them all. But when I went through school, they never told me they were trying to train my mind. John Houseman taught me that. You know who John Houseman was? He started out an acting career, I think in his late 60s or 70s, and he was on the Paper Chase. And he said to these kids in the school, because he said, "You'll come in here, your skull's full of mush. And you're going to teach yourselves the law, and I'm going to train your mind. And if you're lucky, you'll go out of here thinking like lawyers." And I started thinking, wow, train your mind. They always told me they're just trying to get me through the freshman class so I wouldn't be in there next year. That's what I always got. They're just trying to get me a little above a C+ average. And I struggled. I was never really good at anything. I never really a natural pilot. I had to work hard at it, the way I look at it. Maybe it's not all true, but that's how I feel. I also never knew that the whole magic of life is going through just making the right choices. A dear friend told me recently that she never knew that either, and she was really giving me a little sermon on making the right choices. And I asked her, I said, Virginia, when did you learn that? She said, after I was married and divorced 3 times. Then it came loud and clear. And so we're all that way. We have to make a few mistakes before we find out that it's good and bad choices. I never knew that. They never told me that when I was going to school. And finally, they never gave me any course at all in remembering people's names. We have a lot of friends of ours who look and they say, I know that guy. Who is that guy? And but never remember his name. There's absolutely nothing as wonderful as remembering a person's name. And I try anymore. I work at it because, boy, if you see somebody and a couple of weeks later and you say, Bill, how you doing? The guy said, wow, he remembers me. But I'm just admitting the things that I missed. And I'm just starting to get smart after I pass 75, seems to me like. Now, why is that? I think one of the reasons is that at the turn of the century, around 1900, a man's life expectancy was 47. At the turn of the next century, past century, it's now 74. And I'm nearly 80. Wow, somebody's doing something right. And I ought to show my gratitude. So wisen up a little bit, man. Get with it. Pretty late. Might be helpful if you've got any kids around the house that could, pass some of that on to them. But I have no regrets about the bride that I chose. She's sorry that she couldn't come. It's wonderful for her to be asked. She was kind of tired from our last trip to the desert. But Rima, the whole family calls her Sissy. The Air Force family calls her Sissy, and the folks, our friends at United. We've been married 57 years. Wow. And without her standing by and being at home with the kids, it'd have been a lot tougher upstairs. You all know that. We've I think, recognized sometime in the past that the things that seem to draw us together when we were young have a tendency to drive us apart when we're older. And we have to fight that. And we recognize it, and we fight it. Also, I recognize the fact that walking out to the garage, walking out on her once in a while is a good thing, rather than to say something I'd be sorry for. She doesn't like this, but she doesn't think it sounds romantic, but I think it's because you kind of learn how to put up with one another. Now, those are simple words. See, I'm just a farm boy, and I don't have any fancy words to use, but learning how to put up with one another is kind of a way to keep sticking in there together. But the thing that I don't talk back to her. I do walk out. I did early when we were married. After 2 or 3 months, I tore into her one time. I really did. And I didn't see her for 2 or 3 days. And then on the 4th day, I could get a glance of her out of this right eye. I could just barely see her. So I'm not talking back to her now. But one of the things that keep us together, the cement that keeps us together, is that we have some grandchildren. And I imagine you know something about that. And one of them's 17. The oldest one is 17. even more than that, he lives with us. And that's a real education. Now, Daniel is 17, he's a senior. And he goes to school from 8:30 in the morning to 11:30. Man alive, such hours as that. And one of his leading subjects is skateboarding. And after what happened to 911, I'm beginning to wonder how well that's preparing him to be a greater generation. And then I stopped to think, I skipped school to go work in a sorghum factory. I didn't take skateboarding, but I did ride a motorcycle. And maybe there's some hope for Daniel. Especially, I'm going to drop this on you, and you may never forget it. Two dear friends of mine, one was the artist, he didn't do that one, it's another one, an artist friend, and another friend were with me back at Dayton in a museum, and we spent 3 days together. And they told me about my concerns for Daniel. And they said, Joe, just keep in mind, it's only the second inning. That's powerful stuff. That's real powerful stuff. And I will never forget them for telling me that, because that's a great optimistic hope in case you get a little, short with the kids or what have you. It's only the second inning. And I love optimism like that. The most recent I heard was a fellow said that his mother, he was like Mel Tillis, only he couldn't sing. He just stuttered and stammered around all the time. And his mother cured him. No, nobody else but his mother. She told him that his mind worked faster than his mouth, and that's a lot better than people who had mouths work faster than their mind. Powerful stuff. Well, what other people say. I have altogether another 5 or 10 minutes on what other people say. Wow, so powerful. But right now I want to tell you what youngest grandson said, Daniel, who will soon be 8. He came up to me the other day and he said, Papa, he said, make a noise like a frog. And I said, a noise like a frog, Joey? And he said, yeah. And I said, I can. He said, sure you can. He said, I was at the grocery store with Grandma and I overheard her tell a lady that when she croaked, she was moving to San Diego. No, I said that wrong. When Papa croaked, she was going to move to San Diego. It is. Well, as I'm nearing 80, real close to 80, and I have a privilege, I exercise a privilege of name dropping. A name dropping. Before I forget it, John, I'll go ahead. The flag I am wearing tonight has a double meaning since 9/11, but it was given to me on almost a few weeks before Roscoe passed away. Roscoe Turner, being from Indiana, was a dear friend. The story of how I met Roscoe and what was something, but he brought a lot of glamour and charisma to aviation. And Roscoe and his Lion Gilmore, something else, and all together different, wonderful story. We flew for the Gilmore Oil Company. But Will Rogers is a friend of mine, and I must make it clear that I have a new definition for friends. A friend doesn't necessarily have to be, in my dictionary, someone that is an acquaintance, but someone that you admire and respect and think of frequently. And I think Will Rogers was fantastic. Fantastic guy. I would have loved to have met him. Anybody that could say such things as, if pro is the opposite of con, and pro stands for progress, now we know how Congress got their name. and get by with it, talking to the House of Representatives. Grace Hopper. You ever hear of Grace Hopper at Admiral?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic gal. These people have said things that can be something. Grace said, if I had life to live over again and I looked at a situation, I'd go right ahead and do it. Because she said it takes less time to apologize than it does to get an okay in the first place. What wisdom. Tell the young people about that. And it's true. Go right ahead if it looks reasonable to you. Oh, of course, on and on. Red Skelton and Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball is an inspector in the chocolate factory? See? You released endorphins. That's a healing power. These people who were involved, if you don't believe that laughter has healing power, look at George Burns crossed the river at 100 and Bob Hope is 98. So you want to keep on laughing. Well, I want you to know, before we talk about airplanes, that I am not a hero. The heroes, my heroes, are the people who stormed the beaches. They're my heroes. And I went flying because I didn't have the courage to storm the beaches. But I will never forget them. I'm not an engineer. I want you to know that. The most engineering I ever learned was working in that sorghum factory as to how things work. I'd have loved to have been a graduate engineer from Purdue, but I wasn't, and I'm not. I'm not an ace, and I've never been a CEO. And I might say, with due respect to some of you who are airline people, I wouldn't be a colonel if it hadn't have been for airline people who were making a lot more money than Air Force people, and they promoted people so they could pay them more so they wouldn't get out. I was never more than a squadron commander, so my rank should be a major. I believe that. And you think maybe that's a non-progressive farm boy's attitude, but I really believe a lot of that happened. And I did think there for a while I was a test pilot. And then I read this. He was still recovering from a bad burn, and he was exhausted from the burden of working all night without his best friend. And he was in a strange land where he was surrounded by strange language. And he was being observed by a group of prominent skeptics. And he was about to fly an aircraft that had never been flown before, and the control system was lousy. And he had never flown this two-seater. His total powered flight time was less than 1 hour and 20 minutes, stretched over 5 years. He had only about 20 minutes of flight time in the last 2.5 years. His last flight was 2 months before, and it ended in a severe crash in which he nearly escaped death. This was a guy trying to sell an airplane in France, and you know his name was Wilbur. Since I read that, I'm nothing but a maintenance verification pilot, not a test pilot. Can you imagine what these people went through? And I believe every word of that. So I'm not really qualified to speak much as a test pilot. And what I cover my flying career, and then we can sit down and answer questions. If I was home looking for excitement, plowing with horses, John Deere tractor, Farmall, 1020, looking up and see the airplane going over and going thrashing and doing all that. Not really as exciting as that airplane. I left home looking for excitement. And I had 40 years of it. And that's about it. But I didn't really realize what the most important excitement was to all of us. I went back to visit Rushville, Indiana's coffee shop, and a lady who went to our church, and she was old when I was a kid. And she came over and she said, "Joe, you know what happened last summer?" Says, "No." "Ella, what happened?" She said, "My grandson soloed all by himself." Oh, yes. That sounds like a humorous redundancy. But that really, she turned a switch on that turned a bulb on in my head, and I said, that's it. That's what it's all about. The excitement is that solo flight. And I don't care whether you're in a J3 Cub, a Taylor Craft, an Aranca, or whatever. Because when you solo and you walk away from that and you said, by gosh, I didn't kill myself like they thought I would, your self-confidence is elevated quite a bit. And there's not a guy that pulled away from a Taylor Craft that wasn't looking at a Luscombe. Huh? And what it gives you something to look forward to. Now, what more in life to start out when you're young than self-confidence and something to look forward to? The solo flight. I used to talk to Tony LeVere, and I said, Tony, we'd have breakfast down in the Essex house at Lancaster, and I said, Tony, that first flight in that P-80 scared me to death. And Tony said, come on, Joe. You know, his name wasn't Tony LeVere. His name was Anthony Puck from Duluth, Minnesota. When he moved, his father passed away and his mother remarried. He thought Tony LeVere sounded more like a test pilot than Anthony Puck. Isn't that wonderful? Tony. And he said, why in God's name would that P-80 scare you? And I said, first of all, when you started, there was no pop, 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 pop business going on. And at night, especially, there was no fire flaming out left or right. And I said, when you taxied, you didn't have to S. And when you got ready to go, you didn't have to close the cowl flaps. You didn't have to lock the tail wheel. There's so many things you didn't have on a checklist, and when you're rolling down there, you're scared to death. It's so simple. Really and truly, I'd say the Warhawk, the P-40, scared me a lot because I didn't have my wings yet, and I thought you ought to have your wings before you could really handle a tiger cat like that, because I've never seen so much poor visibility and so much torque in my life. And I had worked on the Allison V-1710 and made it at Indianapolis before I went in. But I'm telling you, that character wanted to go to Reinhardt's, and it had a rudder on there that was just about half as big as it should be, and what have you, and visibility, and boy, oh boy, I thought there have been a few airplanes in my career that made you a better pilot. You either made you better or you're dead. There are a few of them. I thought the Sea Fury and the Bearcat were in that category. But I had some experience in like airplanes like the P-40 before that, so that helped me. Well, I won't go into one of the most important words in my life that I'd love to, is the word contrast. Fantastic. I hope contrast means as much to you when you get to this position in life, if you're not, as it has to me. And I'm going to shut up now and sit down with Phil, and we can talk a little bit with some questions.
As you said, there's enough to talk about for years and years. Paul.
Colonel Joe, could you talk a little bit about your aviation cadet training, where you